Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second episode of the series that we're calling Story So Far. We're just looking into the history of the archaeology department through the experiences of some of the staff that have been here. So today we're going to be talking to Steve Roskams. He's a senior lecturer, and I'm sure lots of you will know him, or if you're starting out in the department, you'll get to know him throughout your time here. He's been involved in lots of key excavations and projects throughout his time here. So it's going to be really interesting to learn more about that. So hi, Steve.
Hi there.
So if we could just start by talking about how you first came to work in the department. I know you arrived in the 80s, so it'd be interesting to hear about how you got there and what the department was like when you arrived.
Yes, thanks, Lucy. As you say, I've been here quite a long time. I started in the early 80s, so almost 40 years now, which is much longer than I ever expected to be in York, to be honest. But what's sort of different perhaps about me compared to most other staff is that I didn't come here through a conventional academic background. I didn't come with a first degree in archaeology and a master's and a PhD and all that sort of stuff. I came very much through commercial archaeology. So before I came here, I was working in Carthage and in London on various projects. And I just drifted into archaeology, really. Actually, the reality was when I was a teenager, I actually started digging on site for the money in summers rather than so I could give up my paper round and not have to start so early in the morning. So I never came in sort of through a burning interest in the past as such, though I am interested in it. I came with that sort of background. And the actual specific reasons which I came out of London and arrived in York are, well, equally embarrassing in a funny sort of way, which was a conversation we were having when I, at the time in the early 80s, I was doing post-excavation work on a site I'd been working on. And in one of the tea breaks, we were all very unhappy with the person who was in charge of that organization. And a joke was circulating that there was this job in York and we ought to apply for it on his behalf. And then he might get it and we'd be rid of him and we could get on with what we wanted to do. And I was saying this story to the person I was living with that evening, and she said, "Oh, why aren't you applying for those sorts of jobs?" And I couldn't think of a good reason not to, so I did. And much to my surprise, I got an interview, and even more to my surprise, I actually got the job. So it was hardly a big sort of coherent plan to have a career move as such. Anyway, so I ended up in York in about 39 years ago, 1983. And the rest is history, as they say.
And what was the department like? I'm assuming it was a lot smaller. I know Julian said that it wasn't at King's Manor, it was in Micklegate House.
That's right, and was minute. Yes, we had between, I think, 12 and 15 students in each year, no master students to speak of. And so it was a very different, you really did know everyone well. I mean, to give a concrete example, though at that time we used to have in the summer term a week field trip for the first years, taking them away to a landscape somewhere. My particular favourite was going up to Edrin's Wall and the Cheviots for prehistory and Holy Island and that sort of thing. But the way we organised it is we just took the two Land Rovers and you could put all of the first years into two Land Rovers and we just cruised around the landscape, which was brilliant. So that gives you an idea of the scale of things at that time. So much smaller. Also, I guess is where I fitted into that. As Julian mentioned, there was quite a lot of early medievalists in particular who were around in the formation of the department. I was more sort of an urban archaeologist because I was interested in the sort of techniques of urban archaeology and also the interpretation of towns. So I stepped outside those chronological parameters a bit. It's only subsequently that I kind of gravitated more towards the Roman period and then out of towns and into landscapes. So my first few PhDs were all concerned with medieval topics rather than Roman ones. So I've just evolved really in that direction as the department found it useful.
Yeah, I like that. I think you can really see the kind of parallel between you coming from London up to York, going from urban and then more countryside, I guess. And then that's nice. I like that it's, you know, you saying that you didn't come from a particular interest or like academic history in archaeology, but you brought your own kind of interest in the urban side of it from where you'd been before. You mentioned Julian Richards and from the other video, and he talked a lot about Warren Percy, which is quite a big project in excavation. So I was just hoping you could talk a bit more about your own experience on that site.
Yes, Warren, as Julian mentioned, was very much at the forefront of work at the time. And I was part of that. Actually, intellectually, it's kind of quite interesting, Warren Percy, because it comes out of a very sort of cultural historical background. It was asking stuff about the medieval village based on, you know, the people who were doing the work. So, you know, John Hurst and Maurice Beresford in particular was coming from a documentary history point of view. And it's just at the point when in the late 70s and early 80s, when we're seeing the development of the notion of landscape archaeology. So in a sense, what York brought to the table at Warren was a transition from, if you want to say it like this, culture historical to processual approaches and the development of landscapes and environmental archaeology, and stepping beyond the medieval period to look at the way in which that landscape evolved in the pre-medieval, well, in the prehistoric and Roman and early and then high medieval periods. So I was part of that transition, and I carried on working on a variety of sites there. Not just Warren, but also with Julian on Burdale and other Cowlham, Cottam, those sorts of places and the Wolds. So yeah, it was an important. I mean, Warren was an important starting point that had a long history, as Julian described, before the department and Philip Rarts arrived. But it was also part of an intellectual development which saw Warren in a different way, rather than just as a deserted medieval village, as a landscape which we needed to understand over long periods of time, really. And also at that time, I also had other projects on the go. Because I worked previously in Carthage in Tunisia, I then did some work which students went to in Algeria, in a site called Lambayesis, which is like the military capital of North Africa at the time. So Lambayesis was a major a bit like York in North Africa. So we also took students there, which was, as you can imagine, quite an interesting, exciting opportunity.
Yeah.
So yeah, that ran alongside. So a variety of projects, one way or another, then for all of those years, well, basically right up to the last couple of years, apart from a few times at Star Car and Breary Banks, more or less over the whole of that 40 years, I've run training excavations in the summer. So it's quite surreal now not to be doing that just at the moment. You know, I won't say I'm bereft. I'm kind of both feeling a bit strange on not being there, but also quite relieved in a way.
Pros and cons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Out of all of those projects and excavations, are there any that stick out in your mind particularly for any reason?
The things that probably stick out, yeah, there's a common thing. I was thinking about this before we met. It's quite, well, this isn't a big surprise, but it's probably human burials that are the link in terms of engagement. I mean, for example, at Heslington East that we completed about just over a decade ago, or published recently, there we excavated baby burials of Roman date, for instance. And what was really striking there was, you know, we have this view of the Romans and exposing babies as if they were just sort of thrown away as being irrelevant. But it was very clear that those babies were buried carefully with suitable ceremony, really. They weren't just placed on it. Well, they were buried in a hillside immediately adjacent to the settlement. But it made you realize that at that time, if babies died, that was a real loss to the rural community. And so that sort of hit me quite hard. And also, not surprisingly, you know, students engage with that quite a lot as well. I mean, it's one of the paradoxes. Every time in a commercial context you're excavating human burials, you're meant to not put them on display, but it's the first thing that everyone looking over the fence wants to actually see, of course. So there's always a tension there. I'm not sure what I think about that, to be honest. I mean, I think we're treating them entirely respectfully. Well, we have to, because we would anyway, but we want to find out about them in detail. So we're not just clearing them for the sake of it, even in a commercial context. I mean, at the end of the day, diggers are human beings excavating, fellow human beings, really. So that level of connection's always there.
Yeah,
I seem to be talking a lot about burials now, but
no.
I have excavated other things.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's just such a direct, unavoidable connection between, I think that's particularly the public, it's the first thing that's kind of the most interesting because it's the most like you, because it's, it's another human.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's also interesting comparing that to your work with landscapes, just like the breadth of different study in archaeology, the wideness of the landscape, and then just one individual. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, another thing that just reminds me of really was I was reading when we got the specialist reports in from Heslington, there were 2 adult burials in particular who'd had a really hard life. And the woman was much better preserved, it turned out. They were markers in the landscape, and so they had a role even in death to kind of define the limits of important properties and that sort of thing. But also, it just struck me, I was looking at the photographs the other day, you've got this woman who has various joint diseases, and you've got these excavators excavating that burial, who are also crouched over and no doubt had, like me now, creaky knees and stuff like that. So the actual physical act of excavation is sort of an embodiment of a process of engaging with the soil, just as those people would done in life, because they were part of that rural agricultural community.
So with all the field work that you've done in the department, I'm sure that's changed quite a lot since you started. I know Julian mentioned that the summer excavations, you'd camp there, which is different, because I remember when we did ours in Malton, it would be a coach there and back every day.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, the scale of the size of the individual years is kind of put paid to that. Though I have to say, residential fieldwork can be a bit of a nightmare, because people think it'd be great, camping in on site and so forth. But after a couple of weeks, it gets quite tough, I think. And also, if you're in an isolated place, then you're not actually, you can't actually. If it is Warren, there was a 4-mile walk to the pub, or the landlord laid on some transport or whatever. So it's not all it's cracked up to be necessarily. People have quite romantic images about being out there in the landscape and camping and so forth. And after you're tired, and after a few weeks, the novelty can wear off. So I'm not too unhappy that we do travel back and forth. I mean, it has the added bonus that it means our fieldwork today is is based in the region, so it means that we can make a specific contribution to understanding the context in which we work in Yorkshire. So I think that's quite an important role for the university, really. I mean, I know we call ourselves a university for the public good, but that takes on quite a local and specific aspect when you're digging sites in the immediate area of York, because they've got to travel there daily.
That's great. So before we end, I'd just be interested to know the stuff that you're working on at the moment, any projects that you've got planned for the future, or what your kind of life in the department looks like now.
Yeah, my life in the department is just about to end, in a sense. I'm very much winding down. One of the things I really want to do is develop our approach to fieldwork of military veterans. So I'm linked up with AVAR, which is an American organization doing some of that work. And I'd like to try and develop that, because I do think that archaeological fieldwork and the kind of projectized nature of it, and the way in which it teams engage in fieldwork, is really useful and important in enabling people who've often certainly had physical and quite often mental traumas, enabling them to re-engage with the rest of society. So I'm quite keen on taking up those opportunities and being useful there.
Thank you. That was really great, Steve. And everyone watching, stick around, keep an eye out for more videos in this series. We're going to be interviewing other staff members, learning more about their experience. So thank you again, Steve.
Cheers. Bye.